Good afternoon, everybody. This is going to be the first video where I attempt to teach you some stuff about the Japanese language. We talked a little bit about making a video like this a while ago, and there was a lot of interest, so I've thought a lot about how I wanted to do it. Now, there are a lot of videos out there that teach you Japanese phrases, like the phrase of the day or the word of the day, or like an introduction to a specific expression. And that's cool and everything. I don't want to knock anybody else's content, but I feel like if I was going to come here and try and teach you Japanese word for word, you would have to watch my videos for something like 30 to 40 years before you approached any kind of vocabulary in Japanese. So I don't think that's very useful. I'm not an educator and I don't have the materials to give you guys actual classes. But what I'm going to try and do in these videos instead is from the perspective of somebody who has been, in his room, in his home country, wanting to learn the Japanese language and trying in any way he can to learn it, and actually sort of made the journey and learned the language now, give you tips on where to start, what to focus on, and sort of explain concepts in the language, and then the actual sort of work when it comes to studying, I'm going to leave up to you guys and whatever method you prefer. And so in this video, what I want to do is I want to give you guys a basic explanation of the Japanese writing system, because I feel like that is a pretty decent place to start, and I think it's important. Now, there are a couple of reasons I think the Japanese writing system is an important place to start. The main one being that Japanese grammar is actually deceptively simple. I mean, it's not super easy, but compared to something like maybe a Latin language or German, I think the grammar is kind of easy, and I think the pronunciation is kind of easy. But when it comes to reading and writing in Japanese, it is actually one of the most difficult modern languages to master. And that is why I think it is important to sort of at least get an idea of what the challenge ahead of you is and what the scope of what you're trying to learn is before you get into it. And so this is just going to be my basic introduction to the Japanese writing system, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the language in general. I hope it's enjoyable and I hope you learn something. So to start off, the Japanese writing system, like I said, is very large. It is basically divided into 3 different alphabets that are used together to create the Japanese written language. The first 2 that we need to talk about and that I want to introduce to you today are the Hiragana and the Katakana. So you've got them here on my side, on this side. The one on the left is the Hiragana and the one on the right is the Katakana. This is the Japanese equivalent of our ABC alphabet, of our phonetic alphabet. It looks kind of large and complex, but trust me, this is not as difficult as it seems. It's going to take you some time if you haven't learned this already, but at some point you're going to get to that point where, for example, when you look at a written English word today, you don't see the letter F and think, oh, I know this is F and it's pronounced F. You just sort of take a snapshot with your eyes of the word, and it sort of the sound of the word appears inside of your mind. And that exact thing, same thing, is going to happen with these 2 alphabets, given enough time, given enough experience reading Japanese. The main difference between these phonetic alphabets and the ABC Roman alphabet of languages like English and French is, first of all, where our language, where our letters are built on certain sounds, like consonants and vowels, the Hiragana and the Katakana are based on syllables. So there is, for example, no letter K pronounced K in Japanese, but there is a letter Ka, Ka. There is no letter, for example, S, but there is a letter Su, Su. So one of these characters corresponds to a specific syllable, with a few exceptions. If you look at the top row of the Hiragana and the Katakana, let's just look at the Hiragana on the left for now. The top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 letters right there are A, I, U, E, and O. So basically A, I, U, E, and O in our language. And these are Japanese vowels. They are not syllables. They signify one specific sound, similar to the letters A and I and so on in English. And then if you look at the very bottom on the left, you've got the letter N. This is the only consonant that is not part of a syllable in the Japanese writing system. So The top row of vowels and the consonant N on the bottom are the equivalent of A, I, U, E, and O, and N in the Roman alphabet. All the other letters that you see here, all the other characters, are a syllable. So you've got ka, ki, ku, ke, and ko. You've got sa, shi, su, se, and so. Then you've got ta, chi, tsu, te, and to. Na, ni, nu, ne, and no. Ha, hi, fu, he, and ho. Ma, mi, mu, me, mo. Then you've got ya, yu, yo, and then na, li, lu, ne, do. So as you can see, they're all based on syllables, and they have this. They all have an a, an e, an u, an e, and an o version, more or less. I hope you're with me so far. If not, just back it up and watch it again. So it's based on syllables, but otherwise it's very similar to the Roman alphabet. And you would use this to construct words. The same you would use our letters. So let's, for example, take the word Nihon, which means Japan in Japanese. You can look for the character N in the Hiragana, and then or the row of N, and then you find Ni, which is like the second in the N row, and then you find Ho, ho, and then you add N at the end. So Ni, ho, and N becomes Nihon, which means Japan. So just take these letters, you line them up, and you create a word similar to how you would write a word with the Roman alphabet. So it's pretty simple, and it's kind of basic, and it's not difficult to pronounce. This is just a matter of spending some time with it. Now, why are there two of them? Why is there Hiragana and Katakana? Well, the first thing you need to know is that these two alphabets are actually the exact same. They are signifying the exact same meanings. These are not different letters. So if you look at the top left of the Hiragana, that's A, and if you look at the top left of the Katakana, that's also A, read in the exact same way, but they are written two different ways. So the easiest way to understand this is if you think about our letters. Sometimes you write an uppercase A like that, and sometimes you write a lowercase a like that. There are two different ways of writing the exact same letter, and they're pronounced the exact same way, and this is the same concept. But they are used for different situations, even though they mean the exact same thing. I'm not an expert of Japanese history, but I've heard that way back in the day, because the katakana has these very sharp angles and straight lines, it was considered a masculine alphabet, and it was mainly used by men, and the softer, more flowing hiragana was considered a female alphabet and used more by females or women. And it's kind of like typical of Japan to have misogyny sort of built structurally into the language. It's an aspect of this culture that is kind of unfortunate, but it doesn't have any meaning like that these days at all. These days the language has evolved, and the hiragana is now the basic alphabet used to write most Japanese, and then the katakana is used for anytime you want to emphasize a word or write something special. So for example, if you want to write an expletive, somebody screams, "Oh my God," you would write that with katakana to emphasize it, sort of like putting something in italics in the Roman alphabet. You would use katakana for any, you use it for natural words. So if you're gonna, like, if you're writing something about the elephants, the elephant is zo in Japanese, you would write that with katakana because you're talking about the natural word and the animal elephant, and so you would write that with katakana. But the other and the main application of katakana is you use it for any word that is not a native endemic Japanese word. You use it for any word that is borrowed from another language, and there are a lot of these. So for example, chocolate, passport, alcohol, all of these words that did not exist in Japan until foreigners came to Japan and introduced these nouns to the Japanese. Are written with katakana. So for example, your name is going to be written with katakana because it's not a Japanese word, and that's why it's very important to learn both. You are going to have to use both in your daily use of Japanese all the time. So just to recap, two phonetic alphabets that have there are two versions of the exact same alphabet. One is used for Japanese words, and one is used for borrowed words, or for words you want to emphasize, or for words that describe the natural world, or words that signify like a sound. So if you want to write like boom or rattle or something like that. In manga, when you see these, like an explosion in a comic book, it would say like boom or something, and that sort of boom sound would definitely be written with katakana in Japan. Now, learning these two alphabets is going to be like the first main challenge when you're trying to pick up Japanese. There are a lot of different ways to do it. One easy way is that there are all these kinds of like programs and applications and textbooks you can find where they all look like an image of something. So you use like an image of something in your mind to remember. So for example, the character tsu looks a little bit like a wave, and so I remembered that because I remembered the word tsunami, which is, you know, a big wave. It starts with the letter tsu, and the letter tsu looks like a wave, so I, you know, imagine a wave in my mind and I remember the letter tsu. And you can do that for all of these letters, and there are all kinds of like different materials that can help you do that. I'm gonna give you a tip here. There is a website known as Realkana.com. I'm going to put a link to it in the description of this video. And basically what this is a super simple tool, but I think it's actually one of the best tools you could ever use to learn these phonetic alphabets. You basically put in all of the characters you want to practice. If you want, you can put in the entire Hiragana and Katakana, and then you just click start, and the website, the browser throws a character at you. You write what you think that character is. For example, if you think it's the character Sa, you write SA. If you're right, the next character pops up. If you're wrong, it says no, and then you have to try again. And you can just sit down, listen to music, and just do that for hours and hours and hours, and eventually you're going to know these two alphabets. That's the easiest way to learn once you've familiarized yourself with the readings of the characters once. But that's a basic introduction to the two basic phonetic alphabets of Japanese. The first thing you're going to have to learn when you want to pick up Japanese writing might seem daunting, but it is deceptively simple. It is just a matter of spending time on it. Now, before we wrap this video up, I'm also going to talk about kanji. You've obviously heard about kanji if you're interested in Japanese. If you haven't, I'm going to give you a basic introduction to it here and talk a little bit about how it integrates into the Japanese language. Kanji is by far the most difficult aspect of learning Japanese. It might be one of the most difficult aspects of learning any language in the entire world. And understanding how kanji works sort of gives you a key to understand the hidden mechanics of Japanese sentence structure and grammar as well. It is difficult enough that I think you should just realize right now that you're probably never in your lifetime going to master kanji. That doesn't mean that you can't become completely fluent in Japanese, read Japanese academic texts, write Japanese and whatever. You can do all of these things, but completely mastering and being able to read and write and remember all of the kanji is something that is almost completely impossible, even for native speakers of the language, even for people who are linguists and native speakers of Japanese. There are just too many of them, and they are just too complex. But you can get to a good enough level that you can integrate fine Japanese society and become a completely fluent user. Just be aware that nobody expects you to remember and be able to write all the kanji. So what are the kanji? Well, the Japanese writing system is borrowed from Chinese. Many years ago, many hundreds of years ago, the Japanese adopted the Chinese writing system. The Japanese don't like to admit this, but in almost every aspect of their culture, if you look historically, the Japanese culture is a daughter culture of the Chinese culture. And so politics, the economy, family culture, money, all of these things have their cradle is all in like in ancient China. And the writing system is no exception. Now, if you know about Chinese characters, you've probably seen them. There are these big sort of almost like a picture of something, and then they have a certain meaning. They correspond to a certain meaning in the real natural world. So, for example, the character for mountain looks a little bit like a mountain, and then you see that, and then it has a specific reading. I don't know Chinese, but I think the reading for the character mountain is Zhang, but I don't know. But that's the Chinese version. So you have a character, it's read in a specific way, for example, zan, and then you can put that in words and you can construct sentences with it in Chinese. Japanese is different. Japanese took these characters a long time ago, and then the two languages have sort of diverged and evolved in two different directions, so now they're kind of different. But because of how Japanese works, a single character, a single one of these kanji can be read in multiple different ways in Japanese and can be signify multiple different meanings, which is why it becomes so difficult. In Chinese, like I said, I'm no expert, but I think typically a character has one way of reading it and one thing that it can mean most of the time. In Japanese, it's very different. So to explain a little bit more about what I mean, I'm going to bring up a basic kanji here. This thing that popped up right now is a kanji. This is a kind of a simple one. It's one of the first 20 or at least the first 50 you're ever going to learn when you start picking up Japanese. Now the main meaning of this kanji is life or to live. It has, most of the kanji have like a specific meaning, but then they can, like I said, have multiple different sort of nuances and way that you read them. So this kanji can, for example, mean to live, but it can also mean to be born, for example. So just this one simple kanji off of the top of my head can be read depending on what word it is used in, depending on what characters are next to it. It can be read sei, it can be read sho, it can be read jo, it can be read umu, it can be read ikiru, it can be read nama, which means raw or uncooked. So it has like all these multiple different but vaguely similar meanings and similar readings. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about how to read and use kanji, but I just want to give you an introduction to what they are so that you have a sort of mental image of what the Japanese writing system is. So how do kanji, hiragana, and katakana integrate in Japanese writing? Basically, nouns and verbs in Japanese, almost all of them, but not all of them, but most verbs and most nouns have a specific kanji associated with them. So for example, the kanji to swim, oyogu, has a kanji. And you see that and you think swim. Okay, this is the character for swim. Then you need to conjugate verbs, and you need to put nouns in senses where they have pronouns and where there's structure around the words like it and there and to, and also conjugation of verbs. So you've got swim, but you also have swam and swum, right? You've got to conjugate verbs. So basically what happens in Japanese is a noun or a verb will be written with its corresponding kanji, but then the conjugation of the verb will be written with hiragana. So you got the kanji and then you got the hiragana for the conjugation. And all the other words, like I said, pronouns and small words like that, to and from and all of those words are also written with hiragana. So you basically have a lot of kanji and then hiragana connecting them and creating the sort of connections between the kanji, and the kanji sort of create these sort of structural pillars in the sentence. So with the example I used before, the word swim, the kanji would signify the letters SW, su, and then you would use hiragana to write the su-im, the su-um, and the su-am, the conjugation. The stem of the word is the same, and then all the different variations, the ways that it can change, have to be written in hiragana, and that's something that's called okurigana in Japanese, but that's for another day. Not something you need to learn yet. One thing I should say here that you need to know when you're new to this is that while kanji are extremely difficult, they are not needed when you are new to Japanese. I mentioned earlier that this kanji that you see on the screen right now, one way to read it is nama, which means raw or uncooked. You can actually just take the hiragana na and the hiragana ma and write those, and that would spell nama. And that would have the exact same meaning, and a Japanese person could read that and understand what you mean. It's just considered, when you are good at Japanese, easier to understand and more proper to use kanji. So you can get around without using kanji when you are new, if you learn hiragana and katakana, and then gradually, as you get better over the course of your entire life, because this is a lifelong project, gradually start integrating kanji and making your Japanese look better and more advanced on the page. Wow, that was a long and difficult explanation to make. I don't know if it made sense to you. If not, please rewind the video and watch it again. I know that this is daunting and it's not like super fun to listen to when you want to do something really cool and really fun, like learn a new language, but if you can just sort of, I just want to give you a mental picture of what the challenge is ahead. And then like the main way to learn Japanese, in my opinion, is like watch anime, like go drinking with Japanese people, listen to your favorite Japanese pop bands, like have a lot of fun, and then every once in a while sit down with your computer or some textbooks and try to learn some Japanese kanji and sort of build your structural written and read Japanese in the background, and eventually you're going to get there given time. There are no quick fixes for learning kanji or hiragana and katakana. You can learn how to speak and understand Japanese grammar and how to pronounce Japanese beautifully by having fun, by playing around with it, by watching your favorite shows, but you need to sort of keep this in the back of your mind, and every once in a while simply sit down and look at it and try to keep up with your kanji as well. But that's my basic introduction to the Japanese writing system. I hope it made sense. I'm gonna say, in Chinese, some years ago, basically they realized that our writing system is a little bit too difficult and a little bit too complex. So in China they have something known as simplified Chinese these days, where they took their version of kanji and just made them easier to read and write. That is something that is never going to happen in Japan. If we're going to talk a little bit about Japan and Japanese culture, if there's one thing I've learned about this culture and the people here, I mean, this is just my own ignorant opinion, but the most defining characteristic of Japanese culture, in my opinion, is that the Japanese are very distrustful of change, and they never want to change or modify anything that they consider to be endemic Japaneseness. So an example would be like if you were running a business in your home country and the business was struggling, you weren't making enough money, and you call a meeting with all the people in the company and you want to try and like solve this problem. What would you do? Well, probably you would try and find new ways of doing business. You would ask the people working there if they have any new cool ideas. Is there anything we can change? Is there another approach that we can make? That is not how that exchange or that meeting would go in Japan. In Japan, when something is struggling, when something isn't going the way it should, what the Japanese do is they go back to basics. They become more conservative. They go back to the core. They start thinking and listening to older people. They go back to the way things used to be, and they try and do what they were already doing, but longer, harder, and more diligently. And I think that's why Japan is a country where people tend to, work themselves to death. It's a big problem in this culture. It's a young girl, it was so tragic, who I think she was like 20 something, just out of university, started working for a big company. It was just a couple of weeks ago here in Japan. And she basically worked 12 hours every single day, didn't even have time to sleep at night. She was too scared to say to her superiors that she was too tired and that she didn't want to, that she wanted to go home. And she ended up, like, within 2 months of entering her first job, just hanged herself, or is it hung herself? No, hanged herself in her apartment, and wrote a note that basically said, why is everything so hard? Why does it need to be so hard? It was one of the most tragic stories ever. But that happens in Japan because people are so nice and humble and beautiful, but they don't really have the sort of drive and the creativity and the confidence to come up with new ideas and find new approaches. And you have very few like startups and new companies in Japan because people just want to fit into existing structures and patterns. And what I'm trying to say here in a very long-winded way is just that do not wait for the simplified new modern version of the Japanese writing system to come out the way it did in China. This is never going to change if the Japanese have anything to say about it, because it is endemic, traditional, beautiful Japaneseness, and as long as the Japanese have anything to say about it, it's going to stay the same forever and ever and ever. So you might as well start studying right away. Alright, that's it for now, I think. Thank you so much for watching this video. The last thing I'm going to do here is I want to give you guys a tip for a cool anime. I'm going to give you guys some cool tips for stuff I want to recommend in these videos. If I end up making more, I'm going to do that every time. I want to give you guys a tip for an anime that I think is going to really improve your Japanese if you're interested in the language. It's one of my favorite shows ever that I watched many, many years ago when I was young. It's called Sayonara and Tetsubo Sensei. That's the name of the show. It translates to roughly goodbye, like my despairing teacher, kind of. It's about a teacher who teaches a class of basically mentally ill and mentally unstable high school students. It's very weird. It's got a quirky brand of humor. It's kind of low budget, but it's really, really cool because it uses a lot of Japanese wordplay and it introduces a lot of the complexities of the Japanese language. If you are interested in Japanese and you watch this, the more and better, like the more Japanese you learn and the better you get at understanding the nuances of the Japanese language, you just discover new things about the hidden sort of jokes and humor inside of this show. For example, every single character in the entire show has a hidden joke inside of their name. So the way it's pronounced or the way it's written with kanji has a specific like comedic meaning. So it's a very deep rabbit hole. It is an amazingly fun show, and so it's going to be like my recommendation for all of you Japanese nerds out there who want to learn more about the language. There's another show that is based on a manga from the same guy who made Sayonara Zetsubo Sensei called Joshiraku, which is another cool show if you want to learn Japanese. It's not super interesting for everybody because basically every episode is just 5 girls sitting down in a room and having an extended conversation about something. But they speak kind of natural, real Japanese, and it's just constant conversation. So if you can learn to follow and sort of listen to how they are speaking Japanese in that show, it's really going to help your Japanese because you know, when you're watching all these shonen animes, it's usually like, I'm going to kick your ass, no, I'm going to kick your ass, and it's just like these phrases that not only are they extremely rude and brash and never used in common Japanese, they're sort of melodramatic and they don't really paint a good picture of what spoken Japanese actually sounds like. Okay, that's going to be it for this video. I hope it was useful and I hope you liked it. Let me know if you want me to make more, and please do give me feedback on, you know, what I need to change because I've never done anything like this before. I don't know if it was good at all, but thanks for watching and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.